Hello, and welcome to the 12 Sixer channel. My name is 12 Sixer, and I'm glad that you've come over and stopped by and visited, and hopefully this will be the first in what will hopefully be a whole bunch of videos related to Japanese Mahjong, and kind of, I guess, my path in playing it. Brief history about me. I started playing Japanese Mahjong because of the anime Saki. I quickly realized, obviously, that the powers and the games that were in the anime series were rather unrealistic. And so I went off trying to learn the actual game. I wasn't actually able to play Japanese Riichi Mahjong at first. The only people that I had around me were people that knew how to play Chinese Mahjong. Whatever form you'd like to think, because there's many out there and I can't even remember. And then eventually I latched on to and joined what eventually is now the Seattle Riichi Mahjong Club. And I've basically been playing ever since. I've had the opportunity to play in tournaments across the country. I've had the opportunity to play in international tournaments, such as the European Championships in 2017 and 2020, and the World Riichi Championship in 2017. And again, along with other tournaments, even around other tournaments that have also been around the world. And I traveled to Japan and played Mahjong there as well. So it's certainly been a game that has kind of expanded my world a bit. I never really planned on traveling to Europe at all, but when I had the opportunity, I went, and I've gotten to see places that I had never planned on seeing before. So, in as much as I'm still learning about this game and everything, it's given me opportunities that I'm not sure I would have had otherwise had I not started playing. Anyways, enough about that. I decided to try and be a vlogger, streamer, however you want to call it, when Anime Evo came about in this year, 2020, and my FGC, my fighting game community friends, found out that I was going to play in a Mahjong Soul tournament in Anime Evo. And one of my best friends basically said, you should get a handle for yourself. And usually whenever I played online, I would just use some random anime character's name that I'd like to use. But, he said, if you happen to do well, you should have a handle like, Itabashi Zangief had his, or, there were others like Bonchan and things like that where, you know them for their handle more than you do their actual name. And I had to think about this for a while, but I knew I wanted to involve Japanese baseball, mostly because I had followed Japanese high school baseball, and from my interactions with some of the Japanese through the WRC and through my trips in Japan, everybody knows me as that gaijin that loves Japanese baseball. So I wanted to incorporate baseball, and then eventually I came upon the name 12 Sixer. 12 Sixer being like a curveball that basically goes straight down, and if done properly, can fool a lot of batters. Usually buckles their knees as they watch it go over for a strike. Now, 12-6 could also, in Mahjong, be referred to as if I'm not dealer and I sumo a Sanbaimon, well, dealer pays me 12,000 and the other players, the childs, pay me 6,000. It could also be if I win with a dealer Mongon and there's 2 Homevan on the table. You get the point. There could be many interpretations of 12-6. And so I felt it apropos that I call myself that. So it could mean both things. Now, I didn't do well in Anime Evo. I did alright, but I didn't do that great. And so even though I had these things set up, I hadn't really planned on doing it up until recently, where I was like kind of getting frustrated with the game. I really wasn't improving, and I kind of decided that I wanted to take a break from being more of like an organizer, as it were, and becoming more of a player again, because I'm still not great at the game. I'm still trying to learn, and I found that a good chunk of my mental capacity has to be focused on playing when I play, and not on other things. Otherwise, I do very poorly because I revert back to bad habits, and that'll probably come in a later episode. So I decided to, start doing this whole streaming bit. Can't stream quite yet. I do have some of the microphone and equipment, but I don't have the laptop just yet. I probably needed a new one anyways, but it didn't help that I spilled coffee on my personal laptop. So a new one's on the way, but it's going to take a little while to get here. So I'm kind of jerry-rigging the process, as it were, right now. And I kind of released a video 0, which was my experience playing in the Japanese Professional Mahjong League, or the Nihon Pro Mahjong Renmei studio. That was certainly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I'm not sure I'll ever get a chance to get it on a video with production quality like that, unless I play maybe in another WRC or some stroke of luck happens. Obviously that wasn't produced by me, but I wanted to put it out there as kind of almost like a baseline of where my Mahjong style was last year and where I'm trying to get to it now. And even in 1 year, I felt that I've made some progress, more progress than I think I've had in prior years. But it's required a lot of rethinking and a lot of reanalyzing about just the game itself. And so when I performed really well in the Montreal Online Open earlier this month, but that was in October and we're in November now. Was it? Anyways, earlier in the last month or so, I decided that, I should probably try to impart what little knowledge I do have out there in case somebody else might find it useful. Especially considering that I had my best showing in this Montreal tournament. So that's actually what the topic of my first couple of videos will be going over my games of the Montreal tournament and trying to point out things that along the way that perhaps I thought of, and maybe also as a test to myself to see whether or not I can make sense of the discards I made then now, because I should be able to, but you never know. The last thing I'll do before I get into going through my Montreal games is kind of talking about what I consider the first 3 tenets of Mahjong. I know this sounds weird. There's more than 3, but these are kind of the 3 that I thought of when I first wanted to try to start explaining kind of my thinking about playing Mahjong. I'm sure there'll be more along the way, but I think these 3 kind of dictate, in a sense, a good chunk of my play. The first one's not really more of a tenet rather than kind of just, you should know this, but it is a game of imperfect information. Just like card games like poker, you do not know 100% of the information that's out there. You know what you have in your hand, you know what you've discarded, you know what everybody else has discarded. You obviously don't know what's left in the wall, and you don't know what your opponents have. So Because it is a game of imperfect information, you're going to have to try to make deductions as to what is out there. Much like a poker player will try to determine what cards his opponents have to determine if he wants to go ahead and continue playing with the hand, or just decide I'll just pass and go on to the next one. Now, obviously, poker is slightly different. Mahjong is slightly different than poker in the sense that generally in poker and tournaments, even in a cash game, there is a finite, in a sense, there is a finite number of hands, but you can always exit the hand or fold without any consequences happening to you. In Mahjong, that's not possible, right? You can fold a hand, you can give up, but at the end, if you get to a draw, you have to pay points out, right? So it's not quite 100% the same, but I think a good chunk of the thinking behind playing in poker and playing in Mahjong are the same. Now, that being said, because it's a game of imperfect information, your discards will tell a story. Because you have to depend upon others' discards to figure out what's going on at the table, you have to interpret the story that each of the three players at your table is saying or telling you. The easiest, obvious one will be, if a player discards everything but Manzu, then the story that you're probably going to get out of that is that they're probably on a Honitsu or a Chinitsu for Manzu tiles, right? Another relatively easy one is if a person's discarding everything but terminals and honors, you might assume that they're going to go for a Kokushi. And maybe you want to keep those tiles because you don't want to pay into that type of hand. But the thing is that you can also decide how you want to tell your story, right? This is also where, poker kind of comes into play, right? Because in poker, people will try to bluff you out of a hand, right? They'll bet you big, they'll raise you, they'll re-raise you, and you think to yourself, do they have the nuts? Do they have the best hand? And you fold, and they show you they've got nothing, right? They sold you a story that wasn't really what they had, but you bought it. Mahjong can kind of be the same way. You can make your discards tell a story that isn't necessarily true, but if your opponents buy it, then it could be to your advantage. So maybe I have discarded all the tiles but the Manzu tiles. But I get to the end and I show I'm no 10, and if you actually looked at my hand, you saw that I had nothing, right? Well, why would I do that? Well, it could be that I decided my hand was so terrible that I probably wasn't going to win it anyways, and so I might slow my opponents down by representing a hand that I don't actually have. And the question is whether or not they'll buy that story, right? I could look like I'm discarding for Kokushi, but I don't have it. Now, that's going to be a little bit harder because chances are 4 of one of the terminals and honors is probably going to be discarded and your story will evaporate quickly, but you get my point. Your discards convey a story to everybody else, and it's up to you and the other players at your table to interpret it and to determine what the story actually is, and if it's actually believable. And that gets me to my third and final point, is that you cannot all play the same game. Now, what do I mean by that? So, nowadays, there is a push, and I don't know if it's more prevalent in North America or just in Mahjong in general, maybe in Japan or whatnot, but to basically play what's called the digital form of Mahjong. Now, that's basically like playing the odds, right? you're trying to determine the best path to take so that you can get a winning hand. And so you determine, well, if I discard this tile, then I can draw 4, 5, 6 different types of tiles, and that will get me closer to Tenpai than if I discarded this other tile, right? And so the whole goal is just to play as efficiently as possible to get to your Tenpai, regardless of possibly what the value of it is. Now, the reason why I say that you can't all play the same game is because if everybody plays digital mahjong, then it's my belief that it becomes easier to read the story of you and your opponents. Because if you know that everybody's playing digital mahjong, then you can then go backwards in time and through their discards infer the shape of their hand, probably, when they get to their Tenpai state, say if they declare Riichi, right? So, the way I kind of see it is that digital mahjong is always on for everybody. Everybody should learn how to play as efficiently as possible. The difference is that I think that each player should have, I guess, what you could call their occult style. The style that they play that perhaps differentiates them from everybody else. Now, again, it's like poker where maybe you lie at certain times and you try to keep everybody honest and you try to see who's willing to push even when you're representing a big hand. Whatever it is. Usually it's something where you can try to gain information or an advantage. Not something like waiting for a 3-so all the time because it's a 3-so. Sorry, I went there. So occult mahjong is almost like a dial on a stereo that you would turn. So where the digital mahjong is like an on-off button that's always on, the occult mahjong is like a dial that you turn. That can go from 0, if you want to play digital mahjong all the time, to, I guess if you turned it up to 11, on a scale, on a range of 1 to 10, when you decide that you just want to wait on a tile because you think it's lucky. And that, in a way, keeps everybody honest, because you don't necessarily know how a person's going to be occult. You might be able to figure that out if you play them long enough, but the whole general principle is that you all aren't playing the same game. You're playing your own version of the game to everybody else in order to gain an advantage. Alright, probably been blabbing enough as it is already. So, let's get started and go into the first round of the Montreal tournament. So, here I am in the first round of the tournament. The pairings come out, and I realize who I'm playing against. Rezel is a seemingly well-known Twitch streamer that you see playing Mahjong Soul. Odokul and Tatanu I'm familiar with because of my dealings running the IORMC, the International Online Riichi Mahjong Competition, the qualifying for the USA and Canadian teams. So I'm well aware of Odokul and Tatanu, and that they are both very good players in their own right, and somehow, for the first round of the Montreal tournament, who I still don't believe I'm a great player yet, am paired against 3 rather decent players, and I'm wondering if I'm going to even get out of the first round without being in 4th place. It's not exactly a great place to be thinking when you enter a game, but again, seeing who you're playing up against, it's kind of hard not to think that. I wind up being the first dealer, which I'm also not happy about because in talking with, or at least in what I've been learning from discussions and lectures and the like, because you're first dealer and it's a Hanshan, and you get your East and South dealerships, I will be the first one to lose my dealership, right? So once South 1 passes, I will not have a dealership again. Which means that, if I haven't made most of my inroads by then, if I need to catch up, say I'm behind, it's going to be a lot harder to do so because I won't have the ability to be dealer and, win small hands until I can win a big hand and make up the difference, right? I have to start thinking about how to make it up in 1 or 2 goes. And that kind of limits the way you could possibly play at the table, depending on what your goals are. So I would have rather wanted to be dealer later in the cycle, especially with facing stronger players, but there's not much I can do other than try to immediately from the get-go think that I need to, make hay, as it were, and grab as many points as I can so that I have the lead and I can try to dictate play going forward, because you may not be able to control a lot of things, but one of the things you can control, not 100%, is the pace of play at the table, in the sense that if I'm in the lead and I am quote-unquote aggressive by trying to complete my hand by calling, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, where if you were behind and you see somebody ahead who's leading calling, you're cursing underneath your own breath because you want time to build a big hand and this person's not letting you, right? Well, if you look at the other side, you have the big lead. If you're trying to call to finish a cheap hand, then you're trying to deny the other people a chance at a comeback. It's a nice place to be at, right? As opposed to the other side. So being first dealer, that's my hope. I hope to get out to big lead. I hope to be able to kind of control the pace of play and then hold on for dear life for the remainder of the South round and hope the lead sticks. Now, looking at this high pie for my first hand of my dealership, it does not look all that great. If you take a closer look, you'll notice that outside of this 4 and this 6 mon, basically everything else is almost a edge tile or an honor tile. I don't have an actual Yaku or Yakuhai of the set of Easts, for instance, so calling that way is going to be a little harder. But, I could theoretically go for a Chanta-ish type hand because, if I get this 1 in the 1, 2, 3, if I get this 8 pin right here, if I get a 2 so right here, or I get another 9 so or an East and I start calling, then I can get Chanta. But because Chanta is edge tiles, it means that my weights as compared to everybody else will probably be a lot thinner, right? For instance, I am waiting for the single 1 pin even though this is a 2-sided weight. I am waiting for the 8 pin as opposed to somebody who has, like a 4-5 mon waiting for a 3 or a 6. And because most of these are going to be runs, I have to depend on Rezel to discard the tiles that I need for me, right? That's a lot of ifs. I mean, at least you could say it's callable, but for somebody who's wanting to just continue their dealership, this looks pretty bad. So I have to figure out how I'm going to get to Tenpai, if I'm going to try to push the Chanta, which I probably will end up doing to some extent, or try to quickly maneuver this into something that I can just declare Riichi on, hope I hit something, right? So the first discard is actually more standard. And a lot of that's because I just don't want to look like I'm going off the rails immediately, and look like I'm going for some weird type hand right from the get-go. Now, my next 3 discards, on the other hand, probably tell people that, right? I've discarded basically 3 middle tiles. I'm at least trying to represent right now that I'm not discarding. Well, I was trying to represent something, but I've discarded all 3 suits, right? So now, if you're one of the other 3 players, you have to wonder what the heck I'm doing, right? Because it's obvious I'm probably not going for like something like a Kokushi, because I discarded the 9-so right off the bat. And now I'm discarding middle tiles to boot, right? And then in the meantime, if you look down, you've seen that I've drawn another 1-so, I think it was. And I've basically been able to void my hand. Oh, another 9-pin probably too. And that I'm trying to void my hand now. I voided my hand of most of the middle tiles. And I can try to push for something like, a Chanta, or even now a Honitsu, because now I have, or not Honitsu, Toi, sorry, where I can call tiles that are kind of near the edge, so it's probably going to be easier for me to get them from my opponents. So I definitely have more options now than I did before. It's still going to require a bit of tiptoeing, right? Because let's just say somebody discards the 3-so and I call it as a pawn, then I've completely eliminated going for Chanta, right? I have to go for Toi. Now, if somebody discards a 9-pin or a 1-so and I call that, I still have my options open, right? I can still go for either, because I've called a set of terminals, and both a Toi and a Chanta would allow for that. So, if somebody were to discard a 3-so at this point, I may actually pass that up, because I don't want to completely limit myself to one hand or one specific Yaku at this time. Alright. So, as the hand goes on, unfortunately, I've drawn the wrong side of this 2-3 weight, and now I really have to be worried about furry 10 issues, right? Because I can't just go off and discard the 4-pin, because if that ends up being my weight later on, the 1-4 again, then I can't win off of anybody else, right? So this 4-pin unfortunately has crimped my hand and almost thrown both of those options out the window, both Toi and Chanta. It's going to take a lot more work now for me to get there. So it's possible that the only thing I can strive for now is to get Tenpai and declare Riichi and hope I hit, or at least hope for a draw. And I get fortunate here, because as you can see, Odocool and Tatenyu have both called once, right? And they're not necessarily going to call unless they're going to they're accelerating their hand and they want to get Tenpai and they want to win, right? You usually don't call unless that's the case. So I really have to be flexible in my thinking, and now that I've drawn the third 3-so, it's pretty obvious what I need to do here. It's going to be hard. I can't do either of those 2 hands anymore, Toi or Chanta, and so the only thing that's left is to declare Riichi, and in this particular case, it's not terrible, even though one of the 9-pins is already out, because both of my weights are edge tiles, and even though it's a Shanpon weight or a double pair weight, the tile is more likely to be dropped by the people out there than it were if, say, my 2 weights were like a 5-so and a 3-mon, right? Because those are more central tiles. They'll probably be kept by my opponents because they will find it useful, and they probably won't drop it if I declare Riichi. Probably. Now, the 9-pin and the 1-so, like the 1-so could easily be dropped by Odocool or Tatenyu if they decide to go forward with their hands, because chances are neither of them are going for a hand that would require a terminal. So even if they got the 9 pin, it's possible they go drop that as well, right? So I go ahead and declare Riichi here because I figure if nothing else I can scare people away, and voila, lucky for me, the next tile I draw happens to be the other 9 pin, and I manage to sumo a Mongon to start, and this is probably the best possible start I could have asked for, realistically, in this game, where now I'm 16,000 points ahead of everybody, and I'm a little bit more freer to kind of dictate how I want this game to go. And, you know, again, since I won and kept my dealership, the goal now will be to continue to extend the lead and to try to speed up play, or at least the perception of play, amongst everybody else as much as possible to prevent them from thinking that they have time to try to build a hand that could possibly come back against me, right? This hand is rather perfect. I mean, it's obviously... I'm only one away from an Itsu or a pure straight. I'm only a couple tiles away from a possible Honitsu, which is a half flush. So, and in best yet, at least in terms of looking at it from the beginning, I can call for this. So that's even the best part, right? Because if I'm restricted to just drawing my own tiles, then it's probable that my hand will come together a lot slower than if I could actually use tiles that some of my opponents are giving me, right? So, yes, the 4-mon discard in the first one backfired because I drew the 5, but realistically, I'm just trying to get quickly to Tempai as much as possible. And even though it looks like it's repeatedly backfiring on me over and over and over again, that's fine, especially if I can convince you that I'm going for a big hand, because as it stands right now, as you see, I haven't dropped a Sozu tile yet, so it's quite possible that they could look at my discards and go, oh shoot, he's going for a Honitsu, and if he has some, if, you know, a Yakuhai Honitsu is already 5,800 points and possibly 7,700 points, right? And that's a lot more points that somebody doesn't want to give up at this point because I'm already ahead by 16,000. So chances are it's slowing down everybody else's hand and buys me time to get close to my hand, right? And as you can see, everybody else is discarding a whole bunch of Monzu as well. Some of them are discarding Sozu, but not a whole lot. A lot of it's the Monzu because they know I'm discarding it. They know I don't need it, and they're going to hoard the other suits until they can get a better idea of what I have. In the meantime, I finally, on turn 11, managed to draw a pair, and so now it's just a matter of, you know, getting to Tempai and hopefully winning, right? And I can call for this now because I already, especially if I get the 5. And as you can see, everybody's still discarding Monzu because they believe that that's what I'm going for, right? And now I'm finally Tempai. Now I could have kept the 3-so and waited for it, but remember that everybody else is already thinking that I'm waiting for a Sozu, right? So there's no reason for me to wait on one because chances are nobody's going to discard one because everybody thinks I'm going for it. I ended up thinking that the Chun was probably better to wait for because at least one of them was out there. And so I thought somebody still might drop one, but if you think about it, it's still part of a possible Honitsu. Oh, wait, sorry. There it is. I get to Tempai now after calling the 4, and now I'm waiting for the Chun. Sorry. So this was mostly done for misdirection. Because I was able to call the set of 4s, it goes against the story that I had been telling that I was going for a Honitsu, because if I was going for Honitsu on Sozu, there's no reason why I should have that set of Pinzu tiles. Other than maybe I'm just trying to get what's called Karaten, which is a Yakuless Tempai, so I can get my, Tempai payments and keep my dealership. But that's intentional because I already have the made straight now. And so hopefully I get the other Chun to drop especially if they don't think I'm going for Honitsu anymore, and there's 2 tunes out there, right? If you draw the third, what seems to be the third one, and you know I'm not going for Honitsu anymore, then it seems safe to discard, right? That's the story I'm trying to tell you, and I'm trying to make you buy it so that if you draw the 4th tune, according to me, you drop it and you pay into me, right? And everybody's calling in the meantime. I mean, like, Rezel's possibly trying to get to a Yakulas Tenpai himself. And if we look at everybody's hands, we see that Rezel has gotten to Tenpai. Odokul has managed to keep the tune, and and must have read in some ways not to discard it. Good for him. And Tatanyu, with that 1, 2, 3 call, I mean, again, trying to tell a story, that probably means that, he was going for a Yakulas Tenpai himself, because what hand could he be going for that he could make both those calls and still have a Yaku, based upon what's out there? And the answer is he doesn't, right? So, we get to the end of the hand. Me and Rezel happen to be Tenpai. Odokul prevents paying in. And I get to extend my lead a little bit more against 2 of the players, while Rezel, keeps pace. So, East 1, second dealer repeat. Things are going according to plan. This hand is a little bit more harder to deal with. I have 2 pairs. I have edge tiles, so calling's probably not an option, at least right now. This 5-6 is a 2-sided weight, but it's not necessarily a good 2-sided weight, because people are not going to drop the 4 and 7 so, because those are the most useful tiles out of the suited set. And so people will keep those, and which will probably mean that there's less out there for me to draw. So this can still be viewed as a slow hand, and a slow hand that's not callable, and whose maybe best bet might even just be a Chi Toitsu, which is not fast at all. Now, I do have a fair amount of Manzu. I could theoretically go for a Honitsu if I wanted to, but I also have middle tiles that I could possibly use as well. And if I get enough of them, maybe I end up going for a Tanyao. But having now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pairs, that 5 so is an immediate indicator that I'm probably going to go for Chi Toitsu, at least in my mind. Whether or not you can read that is another story, but that 5 so discard, at least in this particular case, is because I had a 5-6-6 shape, is now at least declaring, if you looked at my hand, that I'm going to go for Chitoi, because, again, I could try to call for Toi Toi, I could try to call for Sanshoku Doko, but that would require people dropping the 6 of any of the 3 suits or all of the 3 suits, and that 6 is still a central tile, and people are probably still going to use it, and so the chances of me being able to call 1, never mind 3 of them, is probably going to be unlikely. So unless I draw them myself, or magically I get a couple, then I'm probably going to stick with Chi Toitsu. And some of it backfires, because if I had thought about it earlier, that Chun would have stayed in my hand, because it's a terminal tile, or it's a honor tile, right? And so I do spend quite a bit of time kind of maneuvering around trying to get into a Tenpai state, but it's getting pretty hard, right? And, another backfire here with the Formon, but I wouldn't necessarily wait for a Formon as part of my tiles to go Tenpai for Chitoi. Luckily for me, I kept the 1 pin in instead of discarding it, trying to wait for it. and as a result, Tatanu ends up winning a hand off of Odakul for 1,000 points. And that's fine, right? I am trying to dictate the game in this particular case so that people feel like as if they have to grab points when they can, because I'm going to try to, accelerate the game otherwise, right? So now it's East 2, and now my job will be to continue accelerating the game. It's going to be hard because I only have, I have 2 pairs, I have a bunch of honor tiles, and one of my pairs isn't even a terminal, so something like Achanta is out of the question. Not like that's fast anyways. So realistically, if something doesn't develop in the first row of discards, I'm probably sitting out this hand and then just making sure I don't pay in. So I end up with a 3rd pair, being that of a Yakuhai. I end up with a 4th pair, that being of the Wests. So I can certainly call, especially now getting that 3-so, especially if, and this hand's looking a whole lot better in 4 turns, in 5 turns. So, you may wonder, why didn't I call the Hatsu that Odakul dropped on turn 5? I can't necessarily give a good answer on that. It's possible that I didn't think I was still that close, especially because I had to wait for the 8-mon. It's also possible that I ended up completely missing it for no good reason. I can't really explain why I didn't take it. It was fortunate because I ended up drawing the 8-mon on my next draw that I wouldn't have otherwise. That would have gone to Odakul. And now at this point, I am Ishan 10, and if I can somehow get the last Hatsu to come out, then I'm golden, right? And there it is. And having a West and a 5-pin weight is not 100% ideal. In fact, I probably should have discarded the 2 5-pins instead of the 2 9-sos if I really wanted somebody to discard either of those tiles. Luckily for me, it doesn't matter because I happen to draw one of the Wests, and I win a quick hand and I accelerate the dealership forward. East 3, no obvious Yakuhai. I have 3 terminal and honor pairs. Again, this isn't fast, so we'll just have to see what we can make out of it. If it ends up being a Riichi, if it ends up being another Chi-Toy possibility. Oh, look, 4th pair, right? And so this actually, the 4th pair actually makes it really difficult at this point, right? Especially because of the Dora. The Dora is the 2-pin, right? And so if, let's just say I turn that 2-3-3 into a 1-2-3 or a 2-3-4, that's great. I have a Mensu, I have a made straight, or a made meld, sorry. But if I'm going to finish the rest of my hand, I am now waiting to make a set out of my 9-so, my 9-mon, or my Norths. That's a bit of an ask. That's right. That I have to ask. I'm asking for 2 tiles out of a 6 possible to get somehow, and I can't call. Right. Now, if I manage to get the 1-pin, maybe it slightly improves things. But again, trying to call for a Chanta hand is not exactly the easiest thing to do. So, Chi-Toy may end up being the easier option because now I can incorporate the Dora as another pair. It does not help that I draw the next 3-mon, so now I'm really I'm now really in between, right? And the 6-so finally gives me an excuse. And, I discard the pair. I started discarding the pair of Norse because I've just realized that I can't continue going for Chitoitsu when I'm drawing tiles around it and improving my weights in a sense. Turning what are pair weights into Ryanmen or 2-sided weights. I now have two different incomplete Mensu that can accept a Ryanmen weight. And if I really was serious about it and not just trying to be derpy and be like, oh, I'm gonna go for Chitoitsu again, because I end up getting it more often than not. Digital wise, it's going to be the faster way. That's the goal, right? I'm not here to try and necessarily win big hands. I don't care about having Riichi Shitoitsu Dora 2, right? If it's just Pinfu Dora 1, that's fine because I just get to continue being in the lead. And this is where things can kind of backfire on you, right? Because when I decide to go for Cheeto, I usually just, at least for me, I discard tiles that I think other people would find useful, because chances are if they find it useful, it will never come out for me if I need it to finish my hand. But if the tile then is useful, and then I have to pivot out of it, then you're seeing the consequences right now, where I discarded the 3 so, I've drawn the 4 so, I discarded the 5 pin, I've drawn the 6 pin, I discarded the 1 so, or 1 mon, and now I've drawn the 2 mon, and in all those cases, those second tiles I've drawn, I've had to discard, because I've basically put myself in a possible furry 10 position if I decided to keep them again. And at some point, especially now, we're at the midway point of the game. Tatanyu to my right, my Shimocha, has called 2 Pinzu sets, has not dropped a Pinzu tile, and his story is, I'm going for a Honitsu/Chinitsu, be afraid, and I'm like, yes sir, I'm kind of afraid, because that's also the suit of the Dora, and I don't need to be messing with paying into a hand. Now, lucky for me, the Dora gets dropped, but I'm still not going to drop it anyways, right? Because he can call me for Chi even instead of a Pon, whereas the other 2 can at least get away with not having to worry about that, right? And Rezel to my left declares Riichi, and I really don't want to be in this hand anymore, so realistically, this is just all bail 100%, and I don't really need to go over the rest of the hand, because the goal is not pay in and get to a draw. And that's fine, because if Otakul's not Tenpai, then it works out for me, because the dealership moves, right? Guess what? He's not Tenpai. Neither is Tatanyu, so who knows what happened there. Suppose I could look, but let's see if I go back quickly. Oops, wrong way. As you can see, he was going for a Toy. It wasn't necessarily a Honitsu, but he was waiting for a Chun, a 7 so, or an 8 pin. So he was definitely trying to get to a hand. The only problem is that this makes it a lot scary for any of us to really want to mess with. And so getting the 8 pin, getting the Chun, is probably going to be near impossible at this point, because nobody wants to discard, especially the Chun, to this guy, right? Not with the story that he's telling based upon these calls. Alright. East 4. This is a slightly better hand than some of the ones I've gotten in the more recent hands. I have more middle tiles to deal with. I have connected tiles to use. I don't quite have enough to make it really comfortable, because here's 1 block, here's the second, the third is kind of ish, the 2, 4, 5, you could consider it like 1.5, and then the 5 and 6, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I have to figure out a 5th block somewhere, which would be a pair. I can't consider my 4 mons a pair, because that's a pretty good shape to get a Mensu out of. It's not quite callable yet, but there's certainly options I can have. I just paired my 9 mons, so I have my pair, and now my blocks are getting a little bit more delineated. The pair of 2 pins don't help, but for instance, now that I've drawn this 6 mon, I can discard the pair of 9 mon, and I have my pair of 2 pin, and now I can just go for a simple Tanya type hand, right? Oh, and I forgot, Tatanyu declared Reach on turn 4, which may seem early, and it is, but if there's one thing that's helped temper my mindset, it's that I don't know who said this. I'm not sure where they took it from. Somebody can probably tell me where it originally came from. But by the time you reach the end of the first row and the sixth discard, you can almost expect somebody to be tempai or close. So if you're not close, you should assume that you're playing catch up, and start thinking about making a decision to whether or not you're going to continue going for your hand. That seems early. That's like only 1/3 of the game gone so far. But it has helped me temper my somewhat rage when I see somebody Riichi really early. It helps me think rationally about how to proceed with the hand going forward. So now the goal is I still want to try to get, a hand, win some points, deny, Tatanu a chance at getting a big hand. But I'm also not going to be stupid about it either, right? I'm only going to discard tiles I deem to be 100% or close to 100% safe, and to see if I can't push my hand going forward. It's Tatanu's hand's looking a little scary in the sense that he hasn't discarded a Monzu yet, and I'm not seeing Monzu on the table. So that's kind of crimping my ability to push for this hand further. The 9-mon is the only thing really that's safe for me in that suit. So I'm kind of scrambling to make a hand that's at least Karaten by the time this dealership is over. And as you can tell, nobody else is... oh, sorry, and I forgot. I keep on forgetting because it's hard to see Odacool's Riichi tile because it's a bat. But Odacool ends up declaring Riichi in the beginning of the second row, and if I wasn't already playing safe as it was before, I'm still trying to do the same. I have to be even more careful about what to discard. I did run out of ideas, especially when discarding that 2-pin. But it's still based upon some line of logic because Odacool dropped the 3-pin on turn 5. And so the chances of him waiting for a tile on the outside of that are probably low. Otherwise, he might have kept the 3. So, I'm kind of having to grasp at straws a little bit here as we proceed with the hand. Like the 4-pin there was because Odacool had discarded the 1-pin, Tatanu had discarded the 7-pin, and that's Nakasuji, right? So you can't really trust that, but in the absence of anything else, especially since I made this call and I have no Sozu left in my hand, that's really all I can do. So here we are, 1 tile left in the hand, and I managed to get to Tempai, right? I've worked my way around, I've maneuvered, I've gone the long way around, and I've gotten to my Tempai, and now all I have to do is discard the East and claim my Tempai payments. Right? Wrong. I was about ready to discard that East when I looked out there, and I reminded myself that I don't see one. And it could easily be that Odacool and Tatanu are holding a pair and need my third one to win. In which then I am paying something somewhat, something that looks expensive. Especially since, again, Monzu isn't out there. So, the only other tile I could discard to keep my Tempai is the 4-mon, and that's almost worse. Almost. So, there is, in as much as I would love this Tempai, I can't have it. Because I don't want to pay in points to somebody when it's absolutely not necessary to, right? And before we get to the draw, I'll just go ahead and show the hands. And Rezel, luckily for him, and luckily for me, luckily for him that he had them, because it made it such that I couldn't discard mine, and so I had to declare my no 10. He's not Tempai either, but by doing so, it has made it such that I've had to bail my hand, and neither the dealer or myself are Tempai, and at least it accomplishes the one thing, which is moving the game forward, right? Alright. South one. I've netted a plus 500 points since that first dealer in Mongon and not much else, and that's fine because I'm still about 15,000 points ahead of second place. This hand is certainly workable. It's not great though because one of my possible Mensu is in 7-8-9 where I have the 8-9, so improving that's going to be a bear. I also at this point can't really call for it either, so I can't make this run really quickly. So it's just a matter of what I can draw now to try to improve my possible weights, and at least in the early going here, it doesn't seem to be very helpful. Even if I kept the north and gotten the second one, it wouldn't have helped necessarily me a whole lot. This is somewhat progress. This is a lot more progress now. I now have my 5 possible blocks here. 2 of them here in the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Another one with this 4-5. You can consider it a 3-4-5 because I have the pair of 5s right here. So now I can draw a 2 or a 4 pin. I can even draw a 5 pin, really. It's not ideal, but I'll have Yupeiko, right? And in those cases, I won't have to call or declare. I won't have to call. I won't have to declare Riichi. So my options are fairly open. And that's even better, right? So now I'm really close to Tenpai. I keep the 1 in case I draw the 2. I can always discard it later. I can always call, especially if I get the 3 pin or the 5 so. Unfortunately for me, I got to my Tenpai. I didn't declare Riichi because it wasn't necessary, especially waiting on a 3-6. And I pay into Rezel. It's 1,000 points, so I'm not particularly worried. And the other bit of it is that having discarded the 5 so into what he had called, if he was waiting for that, then chances are he probably had a cheaper hand than what I thought he had. And so I'm happily willing to give that 1,000 points away, even if it narrows the gap a little bit more, and mostly just because it accelerates the game, right? I still want to win. I still want to keep a comfortable gap, but at least this is kind of serving one of the goals that I have at this point. This hand's pretty much a mess. The easiest, quickest thing to look for is a 7-8-9 Sanshoku, but that's not great because it's on the edge. I could have kept the Chun or the east or the north to try to hopefully get a Yakuhai, but I decided to continue pressing on for a possible Sanshoku, probably, considering I have 1 made run and 2 proto runs of the 7-8 pin and the 8-9 I'm on. The good news is that nobody else seems to be accelerating their hand. That 4 pin call was because I know I'm probably going to have to, since I already had 2 pairs, as it were, if I'm going to go for the Sanshoku, one of those has to turn into a set. So that's more of trying to lock in something in the meantime so I can possibly get into Tenpai, because that's the only thing I've got right now. And it doesn't look like anybody else is close at this point. And that 9-pin discard is actually a godsend, right? Because, I could have easily drawn the 6-pin, much like I drew the 4-pin earlier in the game, and be like, well, I guess I'm just going to be a furry 10, right? If I discard it, right? In this particular case, I get the right side of it, so now I have a guaranteed Sanshoku if I get the tile that I need, right? And there it is. Right? And here's the other thing, right? You have to... It's probably easy to tell what I'm going for, right? After my second call, if we go back... Oh, wrong way. I've called a set of 4 pins, which, you might think Tanya, right? But then I call 7-8-9 pin, and you're like, well, now you have a terminal, so now Tanya's out of the question. You have called 2 melds in Pinzu, which would normally suggest a Honitsu, but then you went off and discarded the 3-pin and the 1-pin. Why would you do that if you're going for a Honitsu? Because chances are yeah, maybe I won't need the 1 pin, but I certainly probably needed the 3 pin somewhere along the line, right? Because if I didn't need any of the 1, 2, or the 3, then trying to represent a Honitsu suit with the remainder of the tiles possible is going to be a lot harder, especially when you see what's out there discarded by everybody else, right? 2 9 pins are out there, 2 8 pins are out there, there's 1 7 pin out there, and if my range of tiles for a Honitsu are like 5 through 9 pin, it's going to be hard to deduce that like I'm going for that type of hand, right? Because I've discarded honors. So what you should rightly be thinking is, well, the only other hand that you could possibly be going for is a Sanshoku, which means either I'm waiting for a 7, 8, or 9 in the other 2 suits, and which you can play against for sure, or I have those made and I'm somehow waiting for my pair, in which then you really can't play against that because that's 1 tile, right? So, Tatinu probably had a decent hand to try to continue pushing for it. If we go back and look what he had in his hand, he had Yakuhai, he had 1 Dora. It doesn't sound like a lot, but he's dealer, so really it's much what I talked about before, finishing your hand quickly and continuing your dealership. And so it was worth him to pay 1,000 points to me, assuming that he didn't think I had any Dora, etc., to try to push for that hand and keep the dealership, right? South 3, almost done. We're in the home stretch. This hand is not great. I have a pair. I have 1 decent proto run, and everything else is kind of scattered. So I need help. I get it with the Haku. Excuse me. I somehow managed to finish another run, so things are slightly looking up. But there's a bit of a stall going on, right? Because you haven't seen a Haku being discarded yet, and we're already at the end of the first row. You would think then by this point somebody would have discarded it if they don't need it, so that means it's either in the wall or somebody has a pair. Does somebody have a pair? Guess what? Somebody has a pair. So I have to start thinking, well, is it worth it to continue waiting for the Haku, or can I find some way to get into Riichi waiting for it, right, and push people away? I don't really have much of a choice now but to move forward with the hand as is because of some of the other tiles I've discarded along the way. So I just have to hope that Haku comes out at some point in time. Right? That's a big ask. And at this point, if you see keeping the 2, you see Rezel finally declaring Riichi. I still haven't seen the Hakus. So my analysis here is that this hand's probably over, because my path to being in Tenpai is thin. Now I would have gotten my 1. Is it my 1, 2, 3? No. Anyways, there's no need for me to worry about to try to push and pay into Rezel, considering he's in second and I'm in first. I'd rather Otakul not have been Tenpai, but I can't control that. So the gap narrows a little bit further to within a Mongon, so this certainly isn't comfortable at all with 2 hands to go. This hand is certainly a lot better than some of the others. I have my made Yakuhai. I can make... I just need to figure out another meld or 2 elsewhere, because I already have the 1, 2, 3 Mon, but then everything else is a bit scattered, right? I'll probably end up calling the West just because it's a Yakuhai, and then I need to create something else from the rest of this. Luckily for me, the Forso comes out, so now I have another proto run. I get to call it, which is even better. I am holding the Dora. I'd rather not discard it. I'm hoping to draw something around it, which I do. It's on an inside 8 Mon weight, which isn't ideal, but at the same time, you have some people discarding Monzu, and it is a closer to the edge tile, so chances are somebody's not going to need it, like Rezel, and I get to win 2,600 points off of him. And that's a 5,200 point swing going into all last, which makes that lead just that much more comfortable. This hand is not helpful in trying to end the game, though. I don't really have, I have 2 proto runs. I have a third that has on an inside weight. All of them are near the middle, which means I'm probably not going to be able to call those easily, and I'll have to draw those myself. So this is a rather slow hand. I've drawn my 3rd pair, which is not ideal, because while 7 pairs is a valid hand, it's very slow. And now having discarded a pair of 1 pins, that makes the situation worse, because you're only afforded to be able to draw that so many pairs throughout a game or throughout a hand, that if you're trying to go for Chitoitsu and you don't, and you give away a pair, you're probably screwed. Rezel's declared Riichi, and so now I'm just trying to survive. I obviously don't want to pay into him. I'd like to end the game. Odoko's also discarded and declared Riichi, so if anything, I'm hoping he wins, so that the game is effectively over, because Odoko will need a miracle for him to jump me into first. So at this point, it's just hope and pray that Rezel doesn't win and Odoko wins, and that I don't pay in. And trying to be 100% safe while I'm at it, right? And I'm not discounting anything out of the ordinary, right? There are tiles that have been discarded before, or Suji possibly if I really, really had to. And then lucky for me, Tatanu pays in on a 1-4 weight. Is that a 1-4 weight? Yeah, on a 1-4 weight. 3,900 points. Ends the game. I am relieved and happy to have finished in first. And off to a good start in the tournament. So, yeah, it's kind of how kind of how the first game went, and how I'm hoping to go over these games and the other 7 rounds. Might seem like it's going to be these are a little bit longer. I'm hoping to truncate these, but I also want to kind of go over what I'm thinking about at the time, because then that will help you hopefully when you're going through your games. If anything here, if there's anything I'd hammer home with this first game, it's more about being able to, affect the pace of play, as it were. I did get out to the big lead early, and so my goal was to try to manage the game, manage the points that people would be able to go for the remainder of the game. If I could represent and be able to win a couple of quick hands in the beginning, and call and put pressure on my opponents, you can play digital all you want, but if your mindset starts to get panicky because, oh god, somebody's out to a lead and now they're winning hands, and oh shoot, it's East 4, it's South 2, I need to get, 1,000 points because I'm Odocool and I'm 400 points behind Rezel as it stands. Let's just imagine this was going into South 4. You're not going to be as concerned about me in first place more, rather than if you're in a tournament setting, you want to get second, right? Because you don't want to be negative. So being aware of the pace of play and what your opponents are doing at the table is a good takeaway from this. And being able to force somebody or your players into a corner, or a perceived corner, in which then they start playing at your speed and therefore helping you out, right? All right. Anyways, that's it for my inaugural episode, as it were. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, hope to see you next time on the next episode. Oops, sorry about that. And yeah, we will catch you later.